or good evening, depending where in the world you've joined us for this AWA seminar virtual event to talk about Labelexpo coming up in September and the AWA seminar series in cooperation with Labelexpo 2025 in Barcelona. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this short, but I hope very insightful and interesting virtual event. I would like to welcome our participants from all over the world, as well as our speakers and panelists that will join us throughout the next hour or so to share some insights and some thoughts about Labelexpo, but also about the industry and what to expect moving forward in September and beyond. I'd like to start with a presentation on the labeling, pressure sensitive label, and the release liner industry, subjects of the AWA seminar series, which will be held the day prior to the start of Labelexpo, with 3 seminars running concurrent on AWA release liner for pressure sensitive labeling, smart labeling, and shrink sleeve, all running concurrently off-site the day prior to the start of Labelexpo, with a kickoff and introduction and opening reception on Sunday evening. I would also like to just acknowledge and thank our friends at Labelexpo and Informa for their cooperation and their support and this virtual event, but also the collaboration between AWA and Informa and the Labelexpo group is greatly appreciated. So I'm going to start the session today, and then I'll be followed by some words from Chelsea McDougall from Labelexpo. She's a group managing director for labels and labeling, and she's going to give us a little bit of highlights on what to expect at Labelexpo Europe 2025 in Barcelona. That will be followed by a roundtable discussion bringing together a really impressive group of industry experts in their respective areas of knowledge and expertise. And the discussion that Chelsea will facilitate on moving the industry forward and featuring one of the initiatives that Labelexpo has launched this year and their Ambassadors program, which Chelsea will explain a little bit more later in today's program. But I'm looking forward to participating myself in that roundtable discussion as one of Labelexpo's ambassadors, joined by other leading experts in the industry. But let me start the program by giving you some insights into the seminar series, which will be at Labelexpo on label release liner, smart labeling, and sleeve labeling, with the presentation discussing some of the market characteristics and dynamics, what we should expect today and in the future in the labeling industry. Let's first look at the market in terms of the release liner side of the pressure sensitive label, particularly as it pertains to label applications. The release liner market is quite large, representing about 60.9 billion square meters of release liner material produced worldwide, both paper and film substrates. But as we can see from this chart, 47% or close to 50% of all release liner produced is going into label applications, pressure sensitive label stock. That represents about 28.8 billion square meters of release liner going into label applications, representing the regional breakdown on the right-hand side of this chart. We see that 43% of the release liner produced worldwide is in the Asia Pacific region, 25% in Europe, 26% in North America, and 3% in Africa, Middle East, and South America, respectively. All the other applications that make up the other 50+% of the release liner market includes release liner for tapes and graphic films, hygiene, medical applications, building constructions, etc. But today we're going to focus on the label stock market and release liner being produced for label applications, which represents almost half of all the release liner produced. If we look further at the market in the label segment, we can see that about 28.8 billion square meters of release liners produced. This is both film and paper substrates. It also includes PE-coated papers, which we see in the Asia-Pacific region more than we see in North America and Europe, while North America is heavily represented by supercalendered kraft substrates on the paper side, and Europe and Asia is represented by glassine substrates on the paper side. But that's just a nuance between the North American market and the rest of the world. If we look at the global release liner market for label applications at 28.8 billion square meters, we see that 56% of that is paper siliconized, which is either glassine or supercalendered kraft paper, while clay-coated papers represent 14% of the total release liner going into label applications. 14% is represented by polyolefin-coated papers. Again, this is primarily in the Asian market, while film substrates represent a little over 13%, primarily driven by the use of polyester films for label stock applications. And there's some other papers, MG, MF kraft papers, used in some applications, representing 2% of the total volume. If we look at the market by region, we see 48% is represented by Asia Pacific, 22% by Europe, and 18% by North America. 4% and 8% Africa, Middle East, and South America, respectively. And this is the label market, the total label market across all labeling formats. So I just made a shift here from release liner and the release liner used for pressure sensitive labeling to a broader perspective of the market, looking at all labeling applications. What I mean by that is all labeling applications, including pressure sensitive labeling, as well as glue applied, shrink sleeve labeling, and in-mold labeling, where pressure sensitive labeling, going back to the release liner figures for pressure sensitive labeling, represents 39% of all labeling applications worldwide, and 35% is represented by glue applied. This includes cut and stack or wraparound sleeve labels, and 20% by shrink sleeve labels. If we look at this in a little more granularity in terms of growth rates, we see that pressure sensitive labeling is growing at about 4%, while shrink sleeve is also growing at about 4%, a slightly higher growth rate for shrink sleeve than pressure sensitive, but both about 4%, while glue applied labeling is growing at just under 3% and in mold at just over 3%, with an average global growth for labeling and product decoration across all the labeling formats at about 3.5%. If we look at the pressure sensitive category, it's important to understand that that volume represents both applications for primary product labeling as well as applications for VI or variable information labeling. So we're talking about the volumes that are used for barcoding and direct thermal transfer applications, which represents close to 50% of all the pressure sensitive label volumes, while the other half of the label market represents prime labeling, which actually is competing with some of these other labeling formats. It's important to kind of subtract out that VI volume when we're talking about the pressure sensitive label category. So if we look at just primary product labeling, including pressure sensitive, glue applied, shrink sleeve, and in mold, with those volumes of VI labels taking out, we see that 23% of the total prime label market is pressure sensitive, while 43% is glue applied and 26% is shrink sleeve. It's important also to note that when looking at some of these numbers, you have to understand what's being measured. And this is the volume in area of label material. So it's critical to look at these figures and understand that shrink sleeve is 360-degree coverage on a container, while pressure sensitive and glue applied, for example, are more patch label technologies covering about 1/3 of a container on average. So in terms of units labeled, this graph will be different than the square meters of material or the volume of material that is being used for labeling. So that's very important to understand what we're measuring and when we look at some of these numbers. If we look at the label market in terms of technology and use application, we segment the market into a variety of end-use applications, from food and beverage, which makes up a large majority of label applications, as well as health and personal care, pharmaceutical, household chemical, industrial chemicals, transport and logistics, automotive, consumer durables, office products, and retail. As we can see here, these the bars in this chart represents the different colors of the different labeling formats, with pressure sensitive represented here in blue. A lot of these categories, like logistics and transport, office products, retail, automotive, and consumer durables, are heavily orientated towards pressure sensitive labeling. And many of these applications are those VI, or variable information application categories, while the more primary label applications, food, beverage, health and personal care, pharmaceutical, household chemicals, and industrial chemicals, represents more prime label applications and has a variety of different labeling formats being used, while pharmaceutical is heavily using pressure sensitive labeling. We see here that segments like beverage heavily use glue applied or shrink sleeve labeling compared to pressure sensitive labeling. So it's important to understand the different application segments, the type of labeling formats that are being used. If we look at the market in terms of demand growth, we just want to share with you some growth figures for the label market worldwide. We see here that North America represents about 2.7% growth, Europe 3% growth. This is 2024 to 2027 CAGR growth. Asia Pacific 4.3% growth. What's interesting to note here is the growth of Asia, which is for many years has been a growth driver of the market worldwide. But Asia continues to grow at a faster rate than more mature markets like North America and Europe, but definitely is growing at a decelerating rate, falling in line with more mature market growths, like we see in North America and Europe over the coming years. Based on some work AWA does in terms of some quarterly assessments of growth dynamics, this is a chart that shows the release liner market growth from 220 through the 225 in the quarterly dynamics. We see the impact of COVID, we see the impact of destocking in these figures. And if we shift from this release liner figure to the pressure sensitive label quarterly development, it's relatively in line with the overall release liner market because of the dominance of the pressure sensitive label application, representing 47% of release liner produced. But it shows here again the development of the quarterly volume trends through COVID and through the overstocking, destocking period. And now as we get into 2025, a little more predictability, although definitely softer growth characteristics than we anticipated due to a number of macro and environmental issues, which I'll highly and quickly talk about. Cost inflation and deflation, we also measure on a quarterly basis our AWA cost index. We see that costs are relatively stable the last few quarters for various products, and we consider that stability to be fairly consistent moving forward, with some inflationary pressure on some materials, as you can see from this chart. There certainly is a very much a strategic shift in sourcing strategies. Some of this is driven by tariffs. It's also driven by the supply chain issues that we've experienced for many years now, to bring supply sources closer to the production sources moving forward. I also like just to mention sustainability and recycling, still probably one of the most important and one of the dynamic areas within the labeling and packaging sector overall, which is driving a lot of innovation and driving a lot of collaboration, which we'll hear much more about over the next presentations and the roundtable discussion. And all these topics we'll be discussing in much more depth during the AWA seminar series prior to Labelexpo. And of course, I think many of these issues will be really on the forefront of what we should be seeing at Labelexpo this year in Barcelona. So thanks for the time for that quick presentation, just kind of highlights and recaps of various issues around the industry, around release liner and labeling. I'd just like to close by highlighting one of the most dynamic areas across the labeling and packaging sector in general is that around smart and intelligent packaging. And as we move forward over the next 5-10 years, we're just going to see a transformation in terms of connected packaging and how labeling is going to play an important role in that moving forward. So with that, I will conclude and say thank you for your attention. And it's really a pleasure now to introduce our next speaker. And she's also going to moderate the roundtable discussion and introduce our panelists in a little bit. But first, I'd like to introduce Chelsea McDougall, the managing editor of Labels and Labeling and content director. She's based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the USA, but she gets all over the world. And it's always a pleasure to see you, Chelsea, and looking forward to getting some highlights, what to expect at Labelexpo this year in Barcelona. First year it's in Barcelona, moved from Brussels, where it's historically been for decades. So I'm super excited about that. Barcelona is a wonderful city. And you're going to share with us what to expect from Labelexpo Europe 2025. And then you're going to introduce a really awesome list of panelists that I'll join, and we'll have a discussion about what to expect and where the industry is going and some of the exciting opportunities that exist in the market.
Yes. And can you hear me okay? And can you see my screen? Okay, great. Well, so thank you, Corey, for that introduction and for inviting me to speak. And thank you to the AWA team for arranging this webinar. As Corey said, I'm Chelsea McDougall, the editor of Labels and Labeling magazine and content director for Labelexpo Global Series. So as you can imagine, we're full speed ahead towards Barcelona, and yeah, my life is kind of consumed by that at the moment, but in a good way. There's lots of really interesting things happening that I'm going to kind of walk you through. So just a quick roadmap about where we're headed today. I'm going to go over how Labelexpo is shaping up by the numbers. I'll talk a little bit about some new features that you can expect. I'll talk about the sustainability initiatives that are in place because those are pretty exciting. I'm going to offer a brief technology preview about what I see and what the Labels and Labeling team sees as the key themes at this show. And then I'm going to open it up, as Corey said, with a panel discussion with today's panelists, who I know I'll be interested to hear from. So yeah, going forward, as Corey said, Corey's not the only one excited about the move to Barcelona. There's a whole industry, I believe, is. It's a new, modern, high-tech facility at the Fira Barcelona, and it's larger. So the team tells me there's 20% more exhibitor space. So what that means is that's by volume. So there's think larger booths and more of them. There's about 650 exhibitors. Of that, 160 are new exhibitors. And the educational side of things, between the paid master classes put on by the Label Academy and the Pulse feature area, which I'll discuss next, there's about 30 education tracks that people can take advantage of. I'm told that pre-registration is up. I can't tell you those exact figures because, as you can imagine, they change day by day. But what's interesting about that is the pre-registration figures are up, and they're up from countries that typically drove to Label Expo when it was in Brussels. So Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, those visitors from those regions are still registering in numbers, in significant numbers. What is interesting to me is I'm not the only American that will be at the show. There's more visitors from the US. The Americans typically hadn't traveled in droves to the Labelexpo Europe, but a lot of them, I think, are kind of seeing Barcelona and, looking at this new space and saying like, oh, why don't I go check this out this year? Another interesting tidbit is that there's more visitors from Latin American countries. So no doubt that's driven by the shared language, but that's proving to be kind of an interesting boon for the show. So a couple of new features. So as you can see here, this image is of the Pulse. It's a feature area, an educational zone on the show floor. It's free. Every single day, there's going to be expert-led topics on a different theme. So day one is sustainability. We'll be discussing flexible packaging on day 2, future technologies day 3, and on the last day, we'll be exploring folding carton opportunities. So again, this is on the show floor. This is free. There's also networking opportunities that can happen over there. And also on the Wednesday, September 17th, there's a Girls Who Print meetup that's happening at 4 p.m. over at the Pulse. So there's going to be some interesting discussions, some networking opportunities. That's definitely one you won't want to miss either. As I mentioned, the master classes, those are put on by the Label Academy. There's 2 master classes this year, one on RFID and one on folding carton. So as Corey mentioned, interactive smart label technology, we're really seeing that and predicting that that's going to be a trend moving forward. So that one's getting a lot of good exposure and good traction. Same with folding carton. I'll talk a little bit more about folding carton later on, but those are 2 master classes that you can take advantage of. If you want to sign up for a master class, those are full day, in-depth, deep dive kind of classroom setting. It includes a networking lunch as well. So you can sign up at labelexpo-europe.com, or if you've already registered for the show, you can find your existing registration and add the master class on from there. So it wouldn't be a Label Expo if there was not a party. So there's Festa Barcelona, which we're quite looking forward to. That's the welcome party. That's taking place on September 16th, and it's happening at Time Out Market Barcelona. And that's going to be a really fun night. And Time Out Market really offers the best of Barcelona. So there's going to be food and drinks and music and dancing. And of course, if I'm there, there's going to be a lot of dancing. So it should be a really fun evening. Also that night is the Labels and Labeling Global Awards. So this is the first time that Labels and Labeling has taken on the Global Label Awards. So we've kind of streamlined the ceremony. So it's going to be a brief ceremony. We're going to be giving out 3 awards that night. So we're honoring innovation in the label industry, sustainability, and we're also naming a Converter of the Year. So that should be a really fun, exciting evening, both to kind of celebrate opening of the show and then celebrating some innovations in our industry. So, and then finally, for those of you who like to run, there's a run club that's happening. So that's happening the day before the show. So Monday, September 15th, bright and early, 7:30 in the morning. The team has organized a nice leisurely 5K route through the streets of Barcelona. So that should be a really lovely event. I will be there. So if you're a runner, you want to lace up and join that group, you can find more details at the Label Expo website, or there's a Strava group too. So if you open the Strava app and just search for Label Expo Global Series, you'll be able to see your fellow runners over there. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time here on the industry ambassadors because you're going to meet all these panelists later. But what I do want to point out is that these individuals were handpicked by Label Expo for their industry expertise and insight. So they're representing what the event organizers see as kind of key trends at the show and in the industry. So I will say all of the ambassadors too are speaking at the Pulse. So you'll have the opportunity to kind of engage with them over there at the Pulse as well. So we've got Chris Ellison, who is going to be leading on flexible packaging. We've got Will Parker, who's leading on folding carton. Steve Metcalf, who's really bridging the gap between label and packaging converters and the AI and automation tools that are out there. Corey Reardon, who obviously needs no introduction, but he's representing materials. And then we have Marius Tent, who is holding the banner of sustainability at the show. So we'll hear from these industry ambassadors in the next section here. So speaking of sustainability, there's a lot of things that Label Expo is doing both as a show and then with the support of our parent company Informa. So the first is one that we're pretty excited about. It's a label waste recycling. So our operations team has partnered with DMP Europe, and they're going to be collecting the label matrix waste, and they're going to be recycling it into pallets and industrial bumpers. So things that kind of protect walls and machinery at manufacturing production facilities. So that move is supported by both FENOT and C-Lab, so we're really excited about that. And then also the carpet at Label Expo is going to be recycled. So that's another really interesting initiative on the show side. That they're going to, again, supported by our parent company Informa. The team tells me that there's going to be 6 football pitches of carpet that's recycled at the show. They didn't say whether it's American football or football, but they just said 6 football pitches of carpet will be recycled. So it's quite a bit of carpet that's going to be recycled and reused and turned into, given new life. So and then finally, the PPWR, the packaging and packaging waste regulations, that is really significantly impacting the industry. There's going to be a lot of education on that, on the sustainability topics at the show. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that next, and also we'll hear a little bit more from Marius, who can speak more on that. But there's lots of education. The full first day of the Pulse is going to be dedicated to PPWR and other sustainability topics. So really briefly, I want to talk about the key themes that we expect to see at Label Expo this year. So the first is this wider embrace of flex pack and folding carton. So to me, this Label Expo Europe, it's not just a new home in Barcelona, it's actually looking more like a strategic pivot for the show to kind of officially welcome in these new packaging formats. So FlexPack, as you know, it's not new. We've seen it at Label Expo getting bigger and bigger each year. It's often viewed as kind of this natural evolution for a label converter, but kind of simmering under the scenes a little bit and slightly under the radar is folding carton. So already there's a lot of technology crossover that's shared between these print segments. Show organizers estimate about 25% plus of existing Label Expo exhibitors have portfolios that reach across all labels, flexible packaging, or folding carton. So I should say, we're not expecting this to be a major sea change when it comes to folding carton at the show, at this event. But to me, the move really signals that the Label Expo audience is not just producing labels or flex pack or folding carton, it's labels and flex pack, labels and folding carton. Edale is really the only dedicated carton press that you can see at the show, but there's going to be other mid-web presses for flexible packaging production that are going to be on display. So digital printing for flexible packaging, HP has really kind of long dominated this space, but we're really going to see some interesting innovations in water-based inkjet, particularly from Screen. There's a Korean manufacturer too, Veloy, that's going to be launching a toner press that can print on FlexPack substrates also at the show. So perhaps, we won't know until we're on site, obviously, but perhaps the show and the conversations that dominate might come from the Flexo world this year. Mid-web machines from Nilpeter, Mark Andy, Lombarde, Spanday are all going to be on display. Multitech and WeGang have both said that their presses are capable of handling FlexPack materials. But more than just the presses, there's a number of consumables, foiling, embellishment, dyes, tooling, pre-press, all these suppliers that are already familiar to Labelexpo visitors. So this is in addition to material suppliers like Synthagra, Nobelis, Toray, others that are really leading with film innovations. For this, I'm kind of expecting monomaterials and paper-based substrates to dominate the conversation based on a lot of these sustainability topics that Corey's already mentioned and that I'll talk about a little bit later on. You can't go to any event anywhere in the world without hearing about automation, without hearing about AI. It is the topic of the hour. So, but with good reason too. So not only is it driving forward some sustainability benchmarks, it's essential for addressing skilled labor shortage in the print industry that we're seeing pretty much globally. At Labelexpo, we're expecting to see, some major advancements in machine automation. So there's already a great deal of automation in flexo presses, particularly when you think about make readies, automated print pressures, tension, registration, color, that sort of thing. But we are expecting to see an increased use of AI, particularly in inspection and quality control and factory kind of workflow management that's powered by AI tools. So we'll hear more about that in the next section, but I should mention too that more than just streamlining production, which is essential, it's going to really help comply with a lot of the sustainability legislation and mandates that we're seeing. So converters are going to need automation for the collection of carbon emissions data that's required both with PPWR and the digital product passport rules. And it's not just in Europe. We're seeing brands across the globe asking converters for the details about the makeup of their labels and packaging. They're requesting information from across the supply chain. So inks, plates, materials, press room chemicals, all sorts of things. So without automation, collecting that information and sharing it with brand customers is simply not going to be possible. So like I said, we'll hear more about that from Steve in the discussion about how label converters kind of can and should be using these tools. And finally, sustainability, again, another very important topic, not only in Europe, but across the world. We're seeing more governments starting to regulate on a wide range of sustainability issues. So like single-use plastics, recycling targets, and furthermore, converters that are serving global brands, they're going to need to meet those global brands' increasingly stringent sustainability mandates. So it's my view that the PPWR in the EU, it's going to fundamentally influence the entire sector. So it's challenging converters, brand owners, designers, and our suppliers to rethink materials, processes, and compliance strategies. So again, it's why I'm expecting sustainability to kind of dominate the conversations and the news cycle that's coming out of Labelexpo. So again, we have some panelists waiting backstage that can talk more about that in greater detail. So that's enough from me. I can leave this QR code up for a second if you want to connect with me after, maybe find a time to have a little sangria with me in Barcelona. But yes, you can also read more about what to expect at Labelexpo Europe 2025 in the latest issue of Labels and Labeling magazine. It's set to hit desks this week, and it will be everywhere you look at Labelexpo. But we have a very comprehensive and exclusive Labelexpo preview. So connect with me in Barcelona, and I hope to see you there. Thank you to Corey and the AWA team for having me. If we can, I think we're going to bring out our panelists from the backstage. And as they're kind of coming out, I can introduce them as they come on. First up, we have Chris Ellison. Chris is the owner of OPM Labels and Packaging Group in the UK. We have, who else is with us? Marius Tent. He's with us. He's the founder of Via Packaging and 360 Pack Mastery. We've got Will Parker here, who is holding the banner for Folding Carton. He's a senior packaging executive. Steve Metcalf is the CEO and Chief AI Officer at Imagine AI Live. Corey Reardon, who needs no introduction, a class of his own, but he's the president and CEO of AWA. And then, of course, Andy Thomas Emans, who everyone I believe knows. He's the strategic director of Informa Market. So thanks, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Great. So I guess let's start How about we start with you, Andy? I spent my kind of presentation, which I'm sure you heard, talking about how flexible packaging, folding carton, and labels are kind of converging. Do you, in your opinion, like how do you see that transforming Label Expo? Will converters kind of need to master all three to be able to stay competitive?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is that if I look back 10 to 12 years when HP first bought the 20,000 press to Labelexpo, it was the first time that we considered having flexible packaging at the show. And I think at the time it was okay, if you bring the equipment, we're happy to kind of help you market it and publicize it. And in that very short space of time, label converters are the most entrepreneurial probably of any sector of the graphic arts industry, and saw the opportunity, and it was a kind of it was equipment they were familiar with, but it did involve a massive learning curve. But it's really kind of based around two things. It's based around inline flexo, and also based around increasingly digital and will be digital hybrid technologies. So kind of taking those core label technologies and the agility and applying it to the new market sector. Not to say it was easy. I'm sure that Chris is going to tell us about how difficult it actually is in practice. But what we now see is that the same kind of technologies are looking to disrupt the folding carton industry. So it's not really anything that at Labelexpo we've really pushed hard. It's really kind of where the equipment and where the so the agility and the label mentality can be applied to new markets where there is a niche. And that's the important thing, I think, in folding cartons. It'll be similar. It'll be where can you add value? Where can you, because you're up against a highly industrialized sheet-fed offset industry. I'm sure that Will's going to talk more about this. So, you need to find out where it is that you can make a difference, where you can compete. If you can find those areas, then it makes complete sense to diversify. But just like with flexible packaging, it's going to be can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, feedback.
Are we there?
Are we there?
Yes, you are.
Oh, great.
We can hear you.
Excellent.
Okay, yeah. So as I say, it's really been interesting to see how those same core technologies start to also disrupt the folding carton industry from inside Labelexpo. So it'll be very much a question of whether label converters decide to take up those opportunities. But I can see the supply chain will increasingly support them if and when they do make that decision, just like with the flex pack sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe just add to that, what we're seeing is this, and it's already started for years, but I think it's only accelerating this convergence of narrow web and wider web, converting with the help of servo technology, with the help of digital and more flexible workflows that allows for label converters to be much more flexible and not just able to do one thing and one thing only, but a variety of things, whether that's pressure sensitive labels, a cut and stack label, or shrink sleeve, or pouch, or folding carton. It becomes kind of an endless opportunity for label converters to be more flexible and serve their customers on a broader base of formats and technologies.
But I think on top of that, Corey, our comfort zone as label converters is we're used to being fast and agile. We're used to short run. We're specialists at that. We're high on quality generally, and we're very innovative as an industry. We're a relatively young industry, really, and a lot of the innovation has come in the last sort of 40 years. Your customer desires in the flexible packaging market really do align well with our values as an industry. And when we consider that, many people want a one-stop shop, brand consistency is important to major brands, and we're used to delivering that. They want a simplified supply chain and faster times to market. And these all are exploitable with our agility in our sector.
Yeah. So Chris, on that, what do you think is kind of driving a lot of from your perspective, kind of driving that shift? Is it the customer demand, the available technology that's out there, higher margins? Like, what is it that's kind of driving that?
I think it's a number of factors. I think it's probably now easier to enter that market than it ever has been. I mean, I've no personal experience in the folding carton market. I mean, I have to bow there to Will. But certainly in the flexible packaging market, if we go back in the short to medium areas where we've specialized, if we go back 26 years ago when we first started, then it was very difficult to access information and technology. And as Corey mentioned earlier, there's been such technology increases in material, in machinery, in web handling equipment, inspection equipment, and the whole availability now of specialist suppliers that are catering to that sector. It's much, much easier to access than it ever was.
Yeah, not to mention the amazing pre-press,
absolutely
occurred over the recent years.
Absolutely. And then also, the market's changed slightly as well, because you're getting more artisanal brands. Brands are becoming more, localized in some respects in terms of appealing to the end user, which really sits into our kind of niche offering mentality in the label trade.
Yeah. So Chris, just quickly, I mean, Andy did kind of allude to this, but when you were getting started, I mean, what were some of the kind of technical hurdles? What can a label converter who's looking at moving in, what can they expect?
Everything, to be honest with you then. I mean, go back 26 years ago, everything. I mean, very, very few people were even considering producing short to medium run packaging on label presses. I mean, presses were geared up with 8th pitch circular gearing, and things were difficult, and you really had to pick your battles in terms of the types of products that you could manufacture. Even just down to repeat lengths were difficult, and then again, printing a label is a completely different set of terminologies, and the material looks different, it behaves differently in the press. It's a piece of primary packaging. You print one wrong, you can't take one off and stick another one on. It's the whole thing's a different mindset. And then it was a real learning curve, and without sounding negative, it was an expensive learning curve at times. But I think now, as we've touched on earlier, there's more support now within the industry, in the supply base, in the educational base. Presses are far more capable, as we've talked about. Inspection equipment's far more capable. So it's a great time to pivot into those sectors.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that is due in part to you, Chris. You were one of the first, I mean, if not the first in the UK to kind of start looking at this. So you kind of walked so everyone can run. So we appreciate that.
I think someone say foolhardy at times.
So Will, I want to shift over to you a little bit, and on that kind of same trend of how label converters are diversifying. I mean, folding carton is kind of almost seen sometimes as a more mature market than labels or flex pack, but where are you seeing the kind of real innovations happening today?
Okay, thanks for that, Chelsea. And Chris's great framework in what you said on the macro. Have we got an echo again? A great framework in the macro dynamics that are affecting packaging. Yes, cartons by definition is a more mature market. It's been around longer and it's more akin to traditional printing. It's big litho presses by definition, large heavy metal conversion. But It's also a highly inefficient process because that scale addresses a volumized market. And a volumized market that is growing because we've seen the fiber first initiative globally, that people have moved huge swathes for whatever rationale of sustainability or misplaced belief against plastics. There is a place that is growing in an ambition to consume greater and greater amounts of fiber. And that has driven macro consolidation right at the very top. You don't need me to mention those super groups that have formed across the world now in fiber-based packaging. So that all pulls on the supply chain, all pulls on the amount of available packaging to service a market. Home shopping, the proliferation in that alone has had a massive disruption in the amount of materials available. At the same time, we're seeing a proliferation of micro brands, a consumer-driven focus to want to be closer to those brands, to be able to identify them on a one-to-one basis. And we've seen that desire from the packaging and the product owners themselves, who have used various methodologies over the years to try to talk directly to the consumer and to glean that one-to-one relationship. Digital is possibly the key through this because, as Chris and Andy both said, and Corey, it really has been wholly adopted in labels. You can't argue that the last 35 years haven't been the digital generation for labels, more so than any other packaging medium. And I think this year we will start to see the next generation come as that starts to cut into what we consider volumization. But volumization in mid-web versus the volumization in large sheet-fed plants are two different realms. And I don't see the two as mutually exclusive. I see the opportunity, firstly, for the label converter to take that digital technology, that inline manufacturing platform, the efficiency, the speed to market, the agility, all of the benefits that we live in day to day because our rhythm of business is bum-ba-da-bum-ba-da-bum-ba-da-bum. When you go into flexibles or into cartons, the rhythm is a little slower because the volume is a little bit bigger, the customer dynamic is a little bit different. So we come in and we complement. So the same way digital complemented short-run labels and is now growing into volumization with labels and flexibles, I think that's driving flexo and litho and digital into carton board production, where we can be very efficient. We can deliver highly embellished carton products with almost a one-to-one relationship to the client, with all the usual safety and integrity measures that Chris talked to, because the customers want to know they're getting a product that isn't just produced on a fly-by-night basis, but is produced with real integrity. We're a very positive disruptor to the packaging industry at whole. And I often find when I work in particularly larger groups, which are maybe fiber-led or plastics-led, they kind of look at the label industry with a quizzical sort of, you're all a bit weird, aren't you? You're a bit innovative, you're a bit sort of entrepreneurial, you're a bit quirky. And I think that causes them to look at it and think, are they all loonies? But in truth, this is the duality of exhibition. As much as we can see the label converter moving towards the carton producer, those carton producers will see the opportunity to free up capacity and to offer an added value, high-speed service to their customers on the products that within that portfolio fall to that, and to develop a new market, probably with better margins, because highly volumized products by definition tend to be commoditized. So I see it as a real inflection point for the industry. I think it'll follow a very similar course that Chris saw with flexibles 20 years ago. And I think if we were to go forward 25 years, this would be a three-dimensional screen. We'd all be far older, although AI would no doubt make us look the same age as we are now or better. But I think cartons will become as much of a feature of mid-web conversion, digital and analog, as flexibles have, and as much of a critical disruptor as digital has to the entire marketplace.
Yeah, that's really well said, Will. And I mean, I think it sounds a lot like I'm hearing, like you said, the exact same kind of disruption that we saw with, with the flex pack market. It's kind of the same thing. And I'll admit I was a little skeptical at first when I thought, really, folding carton? They're going to have to learn so much new technology. But wasn't it the same with flexible packaging? They had to learn about materials and, what goes in it and new technology and how to convert it and those sorts of things. So, I'm like, this actually makes sense. A label converter is not afraid of that. And I will say, credit to you. I think Will has been having conversations with Andy for years and kind of in your crystal ball has seen this coming down. So why do you think, just, briefly, like, why do you think now is the time that, what's underfoot now that's, making this more interesting?
I think you've seen this proliferation, this desire to identify with customers, to be agile, to bring real value. Fiber First has really driven that narrative into the most effective way of converting. technology is developed. It's developed in the label sector because we're quite an innovative and almost an incubator for new technological ideas. Sheep-fed markets tend to be in much bigger investments, much more staid. Not to disrespect any other exhibitions, there are larger exhibitions which call themselves the innovation show. I think the real innovation show in packaging has been for the last 35 years Labelexpo. I think that's because it's a cooperative show, a collaborative show. It's not just about the technology, it's about the people. And that's a strong message for you guys is that we can go to the technology shows and we walk around and look at boxes. Here, the industry collaborates. It understands that collaboration really does move the needle and develop the industry forward. And that's why we've developed at such a high rate of knots and been so disruptive. I think the proliferation of small, medium enterprises gives that entrepreneurial spirit they'll want to do it. At the same time, I have to say, you've got a macrodynamic in print, general print, where communication printers are disappearing because we're talking online, we're buying items online, we're using our iPhones, there's no need for communications, there's no need for business cards. They're looking to find something new to do, and they don't want to necessarily reinvest hundreds of millions of euros into large factories and large overhead. They want to find a nimble and new way to dominate a niche, and I think this potentially gives them it. You can get into this sector with a label press, with a degree of competence, or printing background, and you can start to convert packaging at a high quality, at a low cost, relatively easily, and to serve markets where you really can pivot your business. So I see this as an inflection point and a macro disruptor for the industry, and I think we'll look back on it certainly the next time in Barcelona and the time after that as the birth of something really quite exciting. And the background to it also, Chelsea, it's nothing new. An awful lot of our packaging has already been converted web-fed on presses. A lot of the fast food packages you see in Europe are done that way. We'll talk a little bit about that in the masterclass, a little bit that in the Friday keynote about where has this already been done. And also, there are certain machinery manufacturers, not traditionally label manufacturers, who have acquired label manufacturing technology and are now scaling that into large-fed web conversion platforms to compete with their very own sheet-fed, because they're seeing the efficiency in being able to bolt that technology together and go from real to almost finished product. And that's very disruptive from both sides. You've got the perfect market. So Barcelona will be fun.
It will be fun. I agree. That's going to be very interesting to see, just the reaction, right? And how people are kind of taking it in and what their thoughts about all of that is. Marius, I want to shift to you. I said that you were holding the banner of sustainability, and I know that's a heavy banner to hold.
It is indeed.
A very important one. So, as we're approaching PPWR, I know you're going to be speaking at the Pulse a lot about that. But from your perspective, how well is the label industry positioned and prepared for these PPWR requirements?
First, I really want to say big thank you, Chelsea, for the questions, because it's absolutely a crucial question, especially at this moment in time. I really want to say big thank you on that one. Secondly, we have a huge transformation, very much driven by PPWR. Starting from there, packaging has suddenly become strategic. If you look backwards, I was for 25 years in packaging, and I'm still, and was so much about consumer appeal, was user experience, product performance. And then actually today with PPWR as the most visible driver, which is coming in Europe, but it's as well, we see that clearly it's inspiring the world. Alongside with the, let's say, UK new RAM assessment, national EPR schemes that are so different. If you look, they are so different, not only across Europe, obviously across the globe, but even within Europe, they are so different. Ink ordinances, you look to Germany, Switzerland, and then all those diverse food contact materials regulation worldwide. Every packaging decision must now be taken through regulatory glasses. That's a huge change. And then to really be truly future-proof, I would say packaging must balance many more dimensions now than did in the past. And I would just mention 3 of them there, and it's for the industry very relevant as well. Consumer experience, that never changes, winning with the shopper, in-store, in use, this never changes. You can do a super sustainable packaging. If you are not winning there, game lost. I'm coming from the brand owner side, right? That's my experience, actually, having the chance really to enjoy a lot there. Second one, brand performance. It becomes critical as well. And last but not least, again, I'm sharing only 3 from many others, regulatory compliance. and actually aligning with the fast evolving rules and recyclability on recycled content and design for circularity. If you look, it's really this third dimension that it's absolutely transformative. As I mentioned, for that many industry, I never seen a transformation as we do see those days. And actually the biggest change, is like compliance is no longer a tick the box exercise. It's absolutely reshaping how materials are developed, how converters are selecting substrate and adhesives, and even how supply chain are structured. We'll mention about the collaboration. Collaboration is going to be critical. Consortium, C-Lab, Europe, these kind of things are going to be crucial because it's a systemic change we are driving here. And then it's as well pushing investment decisions, because if you look, there are things coming in PPWR next year. PFAS requirements are starting with 12th of August 2026. It's extremely short time in packaging, that one. 1 year is nothing in packaging, and it's less than next year. And actually, I'm going to wrap up there. The scale of the challenge, it's huge. And then I'm just going to take one example, very pragmatic. We take flexible because we discussed as well about flexible packaging. To meet the 55% recycled target by 2035, it's 55 for flexible recycling rate, and it's as well by 2035, and it's as well 55 by 2030 only for plastic. The system must achieve a collection, which is around 82%, a sorting 82%, and as well a recycling of 82%. Because if you multiply that, you are getting to minimum 55 point something there. Is telling how huge is the mountain to climb. And maybe really summing up everything, those who are really going to align regulation, but really understanding it in details, and act early, they are going to be the ones that are going to set up for the whole industry. I do think industry is ready, and I do think it's, it's acting, and it's really now a huge opportunity to step up even more.
Yeah. And it's kind of like you and I were talking about the other day when we were talking about timeline and that sort of thing. It's not tomorrow's problem, right? It's right now. It's happening. You need to know.
It's yesterday. It's even yesterday, actually. The ones who did not start it have a huge chance to be late.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, in your view, Marius, do you think there's any kind of gaps that still need to be addressed?
I'm not. The gaps will be always. If you look, actually, and the opportunity is there. What I like, actually, it's kind of, if it's one thing, there are many things to be driven right now, actually. But if it's really one thing that I think it's making sense, if you really look to C-Lab Europe, this is a real catalyst of change what is happening in Europe. And it's really this platform when the industry comes together to drive collection and recycling of release liner and metrics. And then there are happening a lot of pilots with the brand owners. There are happening a lot of of trials on the metrics, and as well on even on setup materials, because we are discussing about the materials left after the exhibition in Barcelona. I do think if it's one gap, actually, maybe I'm going to be even straightforward, is the need to collaborate, which is going to be doubled by an action now, by a strong action now, but really collaborating as the industry and driving action now before it's too late.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that. So Marius will be speaking, like we said, at the Pulse, more on that, and actually with Corey on a panel discussion about PPWR that's happening on the first day of Labelexpo. So Corey, that kind of leads me to you. I mean, what are you kind of expecting as sort of the big material kind of innovations that we can expect to see at Labelexpo this year?
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question. Just real quick to follow up on Marius, you did a good job of kind of summarizing, and looking forward to the PPWR session on Tuesday at Labelexpo, where I'll be moderating a discussion with Marius, but also Marijke Noor from CCL and Pablo from FINAT, which have all respective expertise in this subject. So I think that's going to be an interesting conversation, because I think with PPWR, there's still a long way to go. And, much of what needs to be done is not only the systems and the let's say the infrastructure to accommodate, but the materials that have to be developed and sustainably run. And I think that's what we'll see at Labelexpo on the material side, is, you know, the work that's being done in the fairly successful work being done by, you know, material suppliers across the gamut, whether it's, you know, on the pressure sensitive side or on the shrink sleeve side, or just, you know, relative to any papers or films, whether it's for flexible packaging or carton. We're seeing tremendous developments, you know, with, you know, recycled content, with biodegradability. You know, down gauging, of course, is kind of an easy one these days. But, you know, how do you down gauge while maintaining the integrity and the performance characteristics of the substrate you're working with? Designing for circularity is becoming more and more important, and I think the industry has got that. You see that now for years already, that, you know, across the value chain, the collaboration and the conversations, not just between supplier and customer, but supplier, customer, and their customer, or their you know, supplier, and even co-suppliers, you know, collaborating more, even at the level of competitors that, you know, wouldn't even talk to each other, you know, historically, now are collaborating on the right things that are, you know, supporting, you know, these important sustainability initiatives and PPWR and other things that need to be done, which I'm gonna preface, I think, Steve here, because he's gonna be talking next, and how AI is gonna just be so transformative around all these things that is beyond at least myself or many of ours comprehension, in terms of what that's going to mean moving forward, and probably a relatively short period of time, not a long period of time, with the way things are moving fast. But back to the question in terms of materials, I think we're going to see a lot of material developments at Labelexpo, particularly around supporting, you know, PPWR and just sustainability and design for circularity in general, which is really driving a lot of the developments in terms of new products, new materials, new substrate categories that we haven't seen in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thank you for teeing up to Steve, because Steve, you've been waiting patiently and sitting quietly before we get to you. So certainly last but not least. And actually, I should mention, if anybody wants to ask a question of any of the panelists, I believe there's a chat functionality where they can do that, and we'll see those on our back end here. But Steve, I mean,
yeah, sorry, Chelsea, just one last final comment, which is another tee up for Steve, I'm sure, is, you know, in terms of technology, and I mentioned it earlier and you mentioned it, in terms of smart labeling and smart packaging and intelligent packaging, and the materials that need to be developed to support that, driven by, you know, connectivity and driven by consumer engagement, that, you know, packaging and labeling and the materials that we're producing and converting have to support a new way of putting products into packaging and putting labels on packaging in the future, which will be driven also by AI, and I'm sure some of the stuff Steve will talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Steve, we're very excited to have you come all the way to Barcelona to, you know, speak about AI tools and some of the things that you're seeing. So, Steve, you have a really interesting background because you came from the print industry. So you're really able to, I think, bridge the gap for a label and packaging converter to what's kind of happening in this AI world that seems to change day by day. So I guess we'll kind of start broadly with you. I mean, what are the kind of big trends and the big things that you're seing and tools that a label or packaging converter is able to use?
Yeah, great queue up. And you guys have said some things already that kind of will keep me up nicely here. I think, you know, one thing I think it was Chelsea, or maybe it was Will had said this, you know, the label industry, converters in general, are some of the most technologically fearless people I've ever encountered in my life. And they're entrepreneurial. So you have this bed of entrepreneurialism and drive and innovation that's already there. And you talk to a lot of folks, whether they're, you know, the CEO of the company or the founder, or, you know, some of the technical people or even the business people in any converting operation. And they're essentially just, everybody's full of ideas. And one of the challenges we've had in the past is that ideas were hard to realize. You'd have to purchase a machine. You'd have to depend on somebody else making software for you. This is all changing. I mean, the machinery is going to probably stay in the hands of the machine makers and the materials and the inks and so forth. But the ability to innovate as a business now at any level, whether it's your outreach, your growth, your discovery of yourself, your innovation of product offerings, is just absolutely, you know, going to change. It already has started changing. The things you can do, the ways you can interact with your customers, the software you can develop yourself. You know, one of the things that, you know, I often talk to business leaders in the space, and they have so many ideas on how they could solve problems and reduce friction, say with order intake or in the operations floor. And it's, you know, they're always dependent on some piece of technology that doesn't exist yet, but they have the idea. They know what they want to do and how they could go about it. And I think we're going into a realm with AI where these large language models don't just write emails for us. They don't just write our website copy. They literally write software for us. It's a new development. About a year ago, we started seeing these AI coding agents. And the coding agents are probably the most useful thing that this industry, once we understand what we can do with it, we'll find in terms of AI adoption, because you can literally spin up a piece of software faster than you can write a spreadsheet now to do some analysis. You can handle custom images. You can do upscaling. You can do in-painting. You can look at your operational data and have a PhD level reasoning step on your production schedule. You can have it identify bottlenecks. You can write your own dashboards. You know, I say this a lot to people, is that AI it's not a spectator sport. It's a participation sport. So, and everybody that's been in this industry that has ideas, and not just, you know, the new folks that are coming in, but the experienced, the CEOs, the owners, the retired owners that want to come back in and do some cool things. People have app ideas. They have ways of solving problems that, you know, you would have said 2 years ago, you probably couldn't have done it very easily. I can almost bet you can solve about any problem that has to do with data. And there's a lot of data in our industry. You could probably solve it over a weekend now with a custom app you could develop for your business. It's just insane. And the capability, the rate of improvement of AI tools, I use the analogy that about every month of AI development feels like a year used to feel before 2022. You know, when a year, you know, in 2022, a year felt like a year. Every year you get new software, you get new that was developed, new SaaS tools, whatever it was. Now it's like every month you've got new capabilities. I mean, Google just launched a image editing and generation model just over the last 2 days that is blowing out of the water every other image gen model, and they call it Nano Banana. That was the code name for this thing. But you could do things like drop images together and create composite images very, very quickly, completely lifelike. You can imagine what you could do with that from a custom label design standpoint, just on the image side of our business. But then you start thinking about, and I would say for folks that are going to be walking the show floor, when you talk to vendors and you look at machines and you look at software, the number one question you should have for every vendor that you interact with is, how accessible is the data from the machine? Is there an API or a way to pull the data from the machine that's open and sustained? Because the mentality is, we're going to write our own software. We're going to write our own dashboards now on the telemetry that we get from the machines in the process. Same goes for MIS software. Same goes for any piece of software. Where do we have the APIs? How do we get access to that data? That's going to be your number one criterion for everything. Every vendor you talk to is, how do I get to the data? And what you'll look for, what you want to be thinking about, is where we have the greatest friction in our business with the most amount of data available. That's your target. That's your ability to automate with AI. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I could talk for a long time about this, but it covers the realm of research and discovery, deep research and reasoning models, helping you discover solutions faster, equipment faster, you know, gauge your own assumptions. Like if you have an assumption about a business idea, launch an agent to go do research and study the market for you and come back in about 30 minutes and give you a grounded data report. Is this a viable move? Bringing people into the industry, giving them more tools to work with, making it more fun. There's so many use cases here. So very excited that we're going to be highlighting this.
And it's interesting, some of the conversations you and I have had, Steve, is that the print industry, this AI is kind of a newer concept, but to me, that means there's just so much more opportunity, right? For even small wins, small and large, right? So lots of places that you can take it. We do have a question from the audience that says, from your perspective, Steve, how can AI help companies implement and leverage digital product passports effectively in their packaging operations? Are you familiar with the DPP?
Digital product passports, meaning the where the product is going in its journey.
Yeah. So now each product is going to be required to have sort of kind of a digital twin about its composition, how it's made up.
You bring a use case, I guarantee you can have a prototype built in an afternoon using AI. And so the ability for you to spin up a database, spin up a tracking system right now, spin up a way to use, whether it's vision, cameras, or any way to sort of track a product through your plant. We used to have this idea of like, several years ago, everybody was, and they should still be working on the Internet of Things of their machines, tracking the work through the factory, through the machines. And we always had this idea that, well, what if you could just put cameras on everything and see not just what the machines are doing, what your product is doing, and what the people around it are doing. And so that ability to support a digital passport of what's happening to a job or a product is off the charts. And don't wait for somebody to build the software for you. You could literally, if you're determined to do this with a very small crack team that doesn't necessarily have to be very technical, put in place a tracking system for that's completely customized to your flow and your business and gives exactly the data you want to give out to your customers.
So, and then finally, just briefly, I mean, I don't know if you can pinpoint like one area, because it might just depend on how the business is set up, but where do you kind of see that immediate ROI for an AI and automation in packaging production?
Yeah, I think the sort of the macro areas of use cases, one is sort of, on the customer facing side is how do you deal with your customers? How do you make life easier, reduce friction for your customers, for intaking them? And the other part of that is how do you grow? How do you get discovered? How do you find more customers, do more innovation faster? I usually, it's everybody's got, there's always an operational issue somewhere. That's the next area to go tackle, but everybody wants growth. Everybody wants, to fill up capacity, get the word out about their technology, the machines they're using faster. And AI is such a great ability to go do that, to be your best salesperson, be your marketing team now, to help you be discovered. And the way companies are going to be discovered now is changing because we're not just Google searching anymore. The AI is Google searching on our behalf. So we're out in ChatGPT and tools like that asking questions because we're trying to solve a problem. And the AI will go out and run the searches for us. And so how you get discovered as a supplier, as a provider of services is going to completely change as well. And then you focus on the operational side, and every problem you've ever had, every pain in the butt that's ever existed, every edge case can now be handled, in theory. And so what you want to focus on, sort of like I said earlier, is find the areas where you have a lot of data already, where data is easily to come by, and you've got the greatest friction or the greatest cost, and that's your first target of the use case, is how you might put AI. And everything's multimodal now. So it's not just reading streams of data, telemetry, it's images, it's video processing. You can do this live, and you could build your own solutions for it. So it really is, going back to what I said earlier, what I love about the graphic space in general and the label industry, it's chock full of entrepreneurial people that are technically fearless. If you could plunk down $2 or $3 million on a machine, you can easily plunk down a few $1,000 on some software that you develop over the weekend to solve problems.
Yeah. Amazing. So, I mean, we could sit and have conversations all day with these gentlemen. As I said before, they will be each speaking at the Pulse at Labelexpo. So there's opportunity to hear more, detailed information from what they'll be talking about, but also to network and engage with them and ask questions and shake their hand in person. If I can just end where I started with you, Andy, you've been going to Label Expo, for a number of years, a few, 2-3 years. If you could kind of give maybe one piece of advice for visitors walking the show floor at Label Expo, what kind of technology, strategies, what do you think people should be paying attention to this year?
Yeah, well, it's always difficult. It depends upon how many people you're sending to the show. It's a massive show, and obviously everybody has their own priorities. But what I've noticed going through the exhibitor list for labels and labeling this year, there's so much exciting stuff happening on the smaller stands as well. So I think if you look at something like talking about sustainability, driving so many different strands across so many different sectors of the industry, from Steve was talking about getting information from machines. There are companies at the show, for example, who will show you how to collect carbon footprint data in real time, because that's going to be needed now, because brands are going to need to know what your carbon footprint is. It's these kind of smaller so it's a real challenge. How do you see the kind of key players you want to see, and at the same time make sure that you see this enormous amount of innovation, flux innovation that's happening around the show floor. But it's really about, I think, the things to bear in mind: automation, sustainability. It's no longer about how fast machines work. Steve was saying it's about how they integrate. It's about how it drives your whole strategy to sustainability and automation. So actually, that makes it more difficult. In the old days, it was that machine I want to see needs to run that fast and it needs to cost this much. Now it's a much more complex beast. So there'll be much more to see at the show. Not a very useful guide, but it's probably the best I can give.
Yeah, no, that's great, Andy. And I think we talk a lot about that, like joy of discovery and spending time. Obviously people have their checklist and the quote unquote roller coaster that they want to see at the show, that piece of equipment, but it's also, useful to take time to kind of walk around, and you never know what you're going to discover at Label Expo. But if you are curious about that, you can read about it in Labels and Labeling magazine. That's one last pitch that I'll give for the magazine. But thank you all for being here. Corey, did you want to offer any final thoughts? This was a really great discussion. So.
Yeah, great discussion, and I'll spend a few minutes just bringing everything to a close, but really appreciate the insights by Andy and Steve and Will and Marius and Chris. Always a pleasure to hear your perspectives, and your expertise is really valuable, and having these kind of discussions moderated by Chelsea, great job, is always insightful, no matter where you are in the value chain or where you're coming from across this very innovative industry, as was stated. I'm going to just spend a few minutes and again thank the panelists, and thank Chelsea for her contribution, as well as thank all the participants for their joining us today. Behind the scenes, we had a couple of important AWA folks that were running everything in the backstage of this platform. Suze and Tanvir did a great job. I'm looking forward to Label Expo in Barcelona very much, and hopefully we can start the week and kick it off on the 14th and 15th of September, prior to the start of Label Expo, and have a lot of people join us for the AWA seminar series with co-located programs on label release liner. So looking at pressure sensitive labeling and release liner in a session, while we also look at smart labeling, RFID and other smart intelligent labeling technologies, and shrink sleeve labeling, which will also include a shrink sleeve label award announcement during that program. The seminar series will kick off on September 14th with an opening reception and some keynote presentations, followed by a full day Monday of these concurrent seminars on label release liner, smart labeling, and sleeve label seminar. That'll be followed by Tuesday, the 16th, the opening of Labelexpo. And as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of workshops and a lot of seminar sessions during the show, including the session on Tuesday from 3 to 4, talking about PPWR, which is probably the most important thing facing our industry in the very short term. And I hope everyone can join us at the stage at Labelexpo for that. So without any further ado, I would like to again thank all our participants today and look forward to seeing everyone at Labelexpo in Barcelona, where the weather will be nice and the food is excellent. Here is a QR code for a discount coupon to enter Labelexpo. If you can take that, this will also be sent to all the participants that registered for this AWA virtual seminar today. So with that, thank you and have a good evening or good afternoon wherever you are in the world. Thank you.